There is a place in the state of Georgia where no criminal ever wants to go. That place is called Alto State Prison, formerly Lee Arundel in Alto, Georgia. If you come here, you surely won't make it out.
Stay tuned for Tales from the Toe.
The Nutty Professor got his meat cut off. Chapter 1. Clarence's background. Clarence Hawkins was born in the quiet town of Swainsboro, Georgia. From a young age, he stood out among his peers, devouring books while other boys his age played in the mud. His mother, a schoolteacher, often remarked, "Clarence, you've got a mind like no other. Don't waste it." She encouraged him to chase his dreams of higher education, and Clarence took her words to heart. By the time he graduated high school, he was valedictorian, leaving Swainsboro for the promise of a better future. College became the stepping stone for Clarence's aspirations. At the University of Georgia, he majored in literature and discovered a love for teaching. He believed that education could change lives, as it had his. Years later, with a master's degree in hand, Clarence accepted a teaching position at West Georgia Technical College in Newnan. He quickly became a beloved figure on campus. Students admired his charisma, and colleagues praised his dedication. In the classroom, Clarence had a way of making literature come alive. He spoke with passion about James Baldwin, Langston Hughes, and Flannery O'Connor. His mentorship extended beyond academics. He encouraged students to chase their dreams, just as he had. Chapter 2. The Catalyst for Trouble. Clarence was no stranger to forming bonds with his students, but with one particular girl, it was different. Lauren Hayes, a 19-year-old with a sharp mind and a troubled past, sought his guidance often. Their conversations started innocently, filled with discussions about her essays and life goals. But over time, those talks extended beyond the classroom. Lauren would visit Clarence during his office hours, and soon they were meeting at coffee shops, where laughter replaced academic discussions. At first, the 49-year-old Clarence dismissed the growing bond as harmless. But there were moments, fleeting yet undeniable, when he felt the lines between mentor and mentee blur, mainly due to getting a boner every time he was in her presence. He ignored the warning signs as lust started to overtake his mind. The only issue with messing around with Lauren in an intimate way was she was in a wheelchair, losing feeling from the waist below. At age 11, when she flew through the windshield of her drunk father's Ford F-150 as he lost control of the truck one night on a country 2-lane highway, as his pop's blue-ribbon beer-fogged mind allowed him to veer into oncoming traffic, taking out an entire family of 5 in a Mitsubishi Outlander Sport. One evening, after an end-of-semester celebration, their relationship crossed the line. A hug shared in a moment of vulnerability spiraled into something deeper. Against Lauren's wishes, Clarence took advantage of her, pushing her out of her wheelchair and onto the cold floor, in a back room in an empty study hall. The violation was brief but reckless. Lauren had no feeling down there and couldn't feel anything, but when the nasty old man sprayed a glob of milky white, sticky substance all over her face, it made her feel like the worst human being on planet Earth. Rumors began to circulate among students, whispers that grew louder by the day. Faculty members noticed a sudden change in Lauren's personality, which, once bubbly, was now in a severe state of depression. Eventually, the administration launched an investigation. Lauren's guilt weighed heavily, and when pressed, she admitted to the assault. The Newnan Sheriff's Department was notified immediately, and Clarence was suspended without pay. The fallout was swift and merciless. Parents called for his resignation, students who once admired him turned away in disgust, and the media descended on the college. Clarence's once sterling reputation was in tatters. Chapter 3. The Courtroom Drama. Clarence's arrest made headlines across Georgia. "Professor accused of violating a wheelchair-bound student," blared one local paper. His name, once synonymous with respect and integrity, became a lightning rod for scandal. In the courtroom, Clarence sat stiffly in a navy suit, his caramel-brown face pale and drawn. The prosecutor painted him as a predator who had used his position of power to manipulate a vulnerable student. He abused the trust of his students, of this institution, and of the community, the prosecutor argued. This is not just a lapse in judgment, it's a crime. Clarence's attorney, a short, pudgy 65-year-old, struggled to shift the narrative. They portrayed him as a man who had made a mistake, not a monster. Character witnesses, former colleagues and students, testified to his years of dedication and positive impact. Clarence Hawkins is a good man, his lawyer said in closing arguments. He's a flawed human being who allowed emotions to cloud his better judgment, but he is not the villain he has been made out to be. But it wasn't enough. The evidence, paired with Lauren's testimony, sealed Clarence's fate. The judge, stern and unsympathetic, delivered the verdict. Mr. Hawkins, you violated a position of trust and exploited the very students you were meant to protect. I sentence you to 4 years at Alto State Prison. As the gavel struck, Clarence felt his world shatter. His mother wept in the gallery, her face buried in her hands. Lauren, seated beside her family, stared blankly ahead. Chapter 4. Welcome to the Toe. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed like vultures. Cameras flashed as Clarence was led away in handcuffs. He kept his head down, the weight of his disgrace pressing him into the pavement. Due to overcrowding on the small Newnan County Jail, Clarence only remained there 3 weeks until a transfer van came to take him to prison. The drive to Alto was long and silent. Clarence stared out the dirty Savannah van window, his mind racing with fear and regret. He had spent his life building a reputation, only to destroy it in a matter of months. The white van crept through the gates of Alto State Prison, and Clarence Hawkins felt his guts start to bubble as he held in a nasty fart. The towering concrete walls seemed to stretch endlessly, their razor wire-tipped edges slicing into the gray sky. Inside the van, other inmates laughed, shouted, and cursed, their bravado masking the fear Clarence could feel radiating from them all. When he stepped off the van, the cold reality of prison life hit him like a brick. The CERT team barked orders, their voices sharp and unforgiving. Rows of inmates on one of the yards stared at the newcomers with predatory eyes, sizing each one up like fresh meat. "Move it!" a 300-pound CERT team officer yelled, shoving Clarence forward. The former professor shuffled into the intake area, where he was stripped, searched, and handed his uniform. The sterile, humiliating process stripped him of the last remnants of dignity he had clung to. By the time he was led to his dorm, the whispers of fresh fish echoed down the corridors, each word cutting like a knife. His roommate was a burly, dark-skinned man named Darnell, 6'3" and covered in tattoos and scars. "Keep this room clean and stay out my way, 'cause I got a lot of motion in this dorm and we'll be fine," Darnell said gruffly, barely looking up as Clarence entered. Clarence nodded meekly, setting his belongings on the thin mattress on the top bunk and climbing up, his hands trembling. That night, as the sounds of shouting, fighting, and occasional laughter drifted through the wild dorm, Clarence stared at the ceiling, wondering how he would survive 4 years in this place. Chapter 5. Learning the Rules. Prison was a world with its own set of rules, and Clarence quickly learned that ignorance could be fatal. The hierarchy was clear. The gangs ran the show. Whether it was the Bloods, Crips, or the GDs, each group controlled specific parts of the prison, from the contraband to the commissary. Clarence tried to avoid trouble, keeping his head down and following orders, but his soft-spoken demeanor and academic background made him stand out. The other inmates mocked his quietness, their jeers laced with threats. It wasn't long before the gangs noticed him. At the end of his second week, a group of inmates from the Bloods cornered him in the yard. "Yo, Unc," one of them barked. A wiry 22-year-old with a scar across his cheek said, "You look like you got people on the outside. Bet they send you money." Clarence stammered, I don't have much." Scarface smirked. "Don't matter. From now on, half of whatever you get comes to us or we gonna pull your ass out." Clarence hesitated, but the look in Scarface's eyes told him there was no room for negotiation. He nodded, his heart sinking as he realized the extortion had begun. Chapter 6. The Contraband Courier. The demands escalated quickly. During visitation hours, Clarence's sister, Erica, would bring him small amounts of money and care packages. The Bloods forced him to smuggle contraband hidden in the packages, threatening violence if he refused. "Just stick them condoms up your ass," one of them ordered after slipping a small packet of drugs into his hand. "Act natural, and you'll be good." Clarence's hands shook as he complied, terrified of being caught by the officers. Each successful delivery only deepened his involvement, making it harder to escape the gang's grip. He despised himself for following their orders, but the alternative, becoming a target for their wrath, was unthinkable. Chapter 7. The Erections. Despite going to prison, Clarence's high sex drive didn't go down. When he was a free man, he didn't have a wife or girlfriend, so he masturbated several times a day, looking at various websites on his phone. But in the Georgia prison system, it wasn't that easy for a man like him to keep a cell phone because the gangs would only take it from him if they found out that he had one. So he copied what he saw other inmates doing, which was jacking on female officers. At first, he sneakily did it, but after the second month, he became addicted, wanting the female officers to see him pumping his chicken before busting, as if he was actually laying with the women for real. Alto was one of the roughest prisons on the East Coast. Therefore, the administration didn't allow too many female officers to work there, the average Alto prisoner serving life without. Because of this, Clarence began jacking on male officers and even fellow inmates. Despite not being gay, he reasoned with himself that all cheeks look the same, whether they're on a man or a woman, so as long as he isn't doing the act in real life, then he isn't a rainbow person. After a few weeks, other mad jackers began noticing Clarence, finding it hilarious that an old, nerdy prison duck was in their ranks. Chapter 8. Fatal Mistake. One day Clarence awakened with a rock-hard boner and decided to cut a hole in his state-issued trousers and catch him a victim when his dorm went to breakfast. A few minutes later, when his dorm was called out to chow, he intentionally walked behind the crowd of men, getting a vantage point of everyone's backside so he could select a pair of cheeks to fantasize over. When he found them, he began stroking himself through his pants. Before he could climax into his greasy hand, a large hand grabbed him from behind, and he sat in horror as one of the young members of the Bloods started yelling at him before grabbing the attention of Clarence's victim, who just so happened to be one of the OGs in the Bloods there in the tow. Chapter 9. The End of the Nutty Professor. Later that morning, after the daily prison inspection was finished, Clarence paid the price for his rainbow lust. As he walked back to his cell, 2 of the Bloods members paid Darnell to walk out so they could run in the cell. Afterwards, around 9 of them entered the cell, jumped him in the corridor. The beating was swift and brutal, punches to his ribs, kicks to his legs, and sharp blows to his face that left him gasping for air. When it was over, Clarence lay on the floor, his vision blurry and his body aching. The Bloods then tied him up with strips of ripped bedsheets as their OG walked in the cell, slapping the battered nerd before ordering his brothers to strip him naked. As he lay on his back on the waxed bloody floor, the OG, an average height bully with the body of an NFL linebacker, pulled out a long, sharp shank, and before Clarence could even blink again, he grabbed his limp meat and hacked it off as if he was cutting up summer sausage in preparation for a burrito pocket. The scream that emitted from Clarence's frail body filled the 96-man dorm before a gangster shoved a dirty cleaning rag into his mouth, quieting him up. The Bloods then waited for the officer in the booth to use the bathroom so they could drag an unconscious Clarence to front door, where a code was called as soon as the guard laid eyes on his naked, bloody body. The entire cell block was locked down as the Nutty Professor was placed on a medical chopper and airlifted to a nearby trauma unit where doctors attempted to sew his meat back on his body. This story is horrible and something that no one would ever want to experience, so for all of you who don't want to go through something like this, then stop committing crimes and start living an honorable life as Jesus Christ wants you to live.